Hi, today I wanted to take just a few minutes to discuss A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor. So, first and foremost, this is just a little bit of an introduction like you received for the other stories. Flannery O'Connor was born in Savannah, Georgia in 1925 to a prominent Catholic family. The word prominent means to a respected, to a family that is looked highly upon. She studied at the Georgia State College for Women and won a fellowship to the Writers' Workshop of the University of Iowa, where she received an MFA. An MFA is a Master's in Fine Arts. She received hers in creative writing, and Iowa's Writers' Workshop is one of the premier places to receive this degree. So um, it's pretty prestigious. However, she was diagnosed with lupus in 1950 and died in 1964. So she really didn't live a very long life, and she was often dealing with this illness in her adult life. And additionally, her Catholic roots are really going to come to play in her work. She has a number of works. She really started publishing in 1952 with Wise Blood. In 1955, we have A Good Man is Hard to Find, which is a collection of short stories, which includes the story that you're going to read for this class called A Good Man is Hard to Find. Um, the Violent Buried Away is a novel. Everything That Rises Must Converge is another collection of short stories. In 1972, her complete works were published after her death, and they won the National Book Award, which is a pretty big deal. And then The Habit of Being and Mystery of Manners were um, published a little bit later on. Her writing often presents her views as a devout Catholic living in a Protestant majority in the Deep South. She was often dismayed with the hypocrisy she witnessed within the Protestant Christian community. Um, to break this down a little bit for you, um, for people who consider themselves Christians, there's two basic sects. There's the Catholics, and then there are the Protestants. So Catholics, their church is founded really out of the Roman Catholic Church. We have the Pope in Rome, and then we have the Protestants who broke away from that church, and they look at things a little bit differently. These are two kind of not competing sections of Christianity, but they're two. They go about things a little bit differently, or a fair amount differently. Um, Additionally, the Deep South is considered the Bible Belt of the country. It's one of those places where, and this is feels like an over exaggeration, but it's kind of not. I grew up in the Deep South. You can probably hear it in my accent. Um, and in the Deep South, there's churches literally on nearly every corner. And I say that, I use that word literally. And again, that feels like it might be an over exaggeration, but for some areas of the Deep South, that is not an over exaggeration. But most of these churches are Protestant churches. Um, and the Protestant church operates differently than the Catholic Church. Um, in her work, she explores the ideas of freedom and free will. Many of her characters are choosing free will over freedom, and they're ultimately punished in her stories. We really see this in her collection, Everything That Rises Must Converge. Humor is often employed, but it's a combination of kind of slapstick humor and sarcasm. Sometimes it can be hard to pick up on the humor if you're not really attuned to the fact that there are things she's doing that are supposed to be funny. And we also see the grotesque. We see a distorted reality and we see deformed characters that often symbolically reveal a spiritual lacking. She has one story, it's called Good Country People, where a young woman whose name is Joy, but calls herself Holga. So she's Holga Joy in the story, Joy Holga, or something like that. And she has a wooden leg, and ultimately she ends up being abandoned and someone taking her leg from her, a lover. It's pretty interesting, but it's again example of this grotesque. We have reality being distorted in order to make a point. To make a point. She really wanted to provide an acute criticism of a couple of things. First, the post World War II American manners and mores. She kind of felt like the world was going to hell in a handbasket. People were no longer concerned with um, really looking at the world in a good way, in a moral way. Um, she was really concerned with rampant materialism. She felt like people were looking to things rather than to God. Again, she was a very devout Catholic. She looks at people's, in her works, their pride and vanity. We really see in A Good Man Is Hard to Find the grandmother's pride and vanity being called into question. She's very concerned about how she appears to other people. And this really both goes into pride and vanity. We see her looking at the logical consequences of all these human failings. What's going to happen if we are too concerned with things, if we aren't concerned with manners, if we aren't concerned with our morals, if we're not concerned with what's best for others, but we're concerned with what's best for us and what makes us look the best. And then she also was really looking at the lack of the honest piety that gives a civilization coherence and continuity. That's kind of a big phrase, right? Basically, she wanted people to be pious, to really look to God for their way and their strength, and to hold dear the values as taught by the church, the Catholic Church specifically. Her style is meant to be folksy. It mimics the speech of people in the region of the South. So sometimes you'll see maybe some things that are spelled funny, or maybe are hard to understand because it's meant to sound like people in the Deep South, particularly during this time, spoke. It's set in the 1940s or later in Georgia, and it starts in Atlanta and ends in a place called Toomsboro. That's not a mistake. There's a lot of death in this story, and Toomsboro is meant to be ironic. The tone is pretty cynical, and the characters are grotesque caricatures of people who are often quite laughable. We see these people who, they're not really being taken on as fully developed characters. They're really more caricatures of people, and they're meant to kind of display the worst of these types of people in a lot of ways. In this story, we see Flannery O'Connor really delving deep into this idea of what the Protestant Christian believes versus it's what they say they believe versus what they actually do. And we see this really in the grandmother, and, her wanting to be considered a good Christian woman and look to be a good Christian woman. And yet, when it's time for her to call on God or Jesus, she's really incapable. We also see in the misfit, and the grandmother, this idea of a moral code. And we'll come back to all of these ideas in the next video that you'll get after you do your discussion posts. But I did want to give you just a quick overview of the story in Flannery O'Connor. She's probably one of my favorite writers that we'll look at this semester or this term, because her work is humorous, but it's also really dark, and it's a little bit violent, but she's really holding up a mirror to society and saying, look at yourself and see yourself for who you are, at least society in her time period. And I think her work's definitely biased by her own religious leanings, but she's really calling into question what's going on in society, and I think she does so in a meaningful way. I will talk at you soon. If you need anything, please let me know.